Democrats hold luxury beliefs, and they display them as symbols of status.
Mr. Reagan.
All right, now this is actually an article that I'm going to be reading from and reacting to. It's an article in the New York Post. Now, this article is actually from 2019, but I thought it was a really important article to read and react to. Written by a gentleman by the name of Rob Henderson. He has conceived of this idea called luxury beliefs, which are essentially left-wing, I would say socialist beliefs, where Democrats aren't necessarily affected by the negative consequences of these beliefs, right? We talk about this a lot in terms of immigration policy, right? Lots of people are coming up from the borders. Lots of rich leftists are talking about this as it's perfectly fine. There's no problem with this. This is a good thing. Well, they don't actually have to deal with the consequence of the crime that increases because of, say criminals coming through the border unchecked or lots of drugs coming through the border unchecked. They don't have to deal with that themselves because the immigrants aren't moving into their neighborhoods. So I'm going to go ahead and just read this article here. That in one moment. First, I have to sell you something. Now, Bank of America has just lowered its 2022 forecast for the S&P 500 by a whopping 900 points to 3,600, saying that we are headed for a recession this year. Shocker, I know. It said the new year-end target is the lowest on the street. This is not good news for those of you stuck in equities or anything tied to the stock market. Thousands of people have put their trust in Noble Gold to prevent losing money in the financial storm that is brewing, and you can join them by calling their expert team. Noble Gold was recently voted the #1 gold company in the country by Consumer Affairs. There's no call centers, no scripted response, no bull, just a straight, honest run-through of your options so that you can decide. And by the way, they're giving away this beautiful gold 1/10 ounce American Eagle proof coin with every qualifying IRA or 401k rollover this month. You cannot go wrong with Noble Gold. Call the team now at 877-646-5347 to find out more or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Again, this is from the New York Post. The article is titled, Luxury Beliefs Are the Latest Status Symbol for Rich Americans. And again, Rob Henderson, smart guy. You can see he's smart because he's Asian. Oh my God, that's racist. Yes, I am a pro-Asian evil racist. Okay, so let's have a look here. A former classmate from Yale recently told me that monogamy is kind of outdated and not good for society. So I asked her what her background is and if she planned to marry. She said that she comes from an affluent family and works at a well-known technology company. Yes, she personally intends to have a monogamous marriage, but quickly added that marriage shouldn't have to be for everyone. She was raised by a traditional family. She planned on having a traditional family, but she maintained that traditional families are old-fashioned and society should evolve beyond them. What could explain this? In the past, upper-class Americans used to display their social status with luxury goods. Today, they do it with luxury beliefs. People care a lot about social status. In fact, research indicates that respect and admiration for our peers are even more important than money for our sense of well-being. We feel a lot of pressure to display our status in new ways. This is why fashionable clothing always changes. But as trendy clothes and other products become more accessible and affordable, there is increasingly less status attached to luxury goods. This is actually a really funny observation because I've noticed that if you go anywhere in Beverly Hills to any of the really expensive like brand stores like Gucci or something like that, basically the whole place is filled with black people. Everybody who shops there is either black or Asian, and what I mean by Asian is like from China visiting America. That's it. I mean, you can find almost no white people. The only white people you'll find is maybe in like Cartier. Cartier has white people still. But everywhere else, every other store, it's just black people and Asians all along Rodeo Drive. Now, what could account for this? Either black people are not as oppressed and poor as the left would like you to believe in America, or they're not making that much money. Maybe they work at McDonald's, but they're spending all their disposable income on brand items in order to have higher status. And I think that both of those things are true. I don't think black people are oppressed, and I do think that there's a cultural distinction. You know, brands present you with some status in black America, and in white America, white Americans don't care that much about it. In fact, I think that if you have too many brand things in white culture in America, it's considered tacky. Another thing I would like to note before I continue reading this article is that we've had this kind of bizarre ideas that don't make any sense used to distinguish rich, cool people from the degenerate masses for a long time. You still see these, haute couture fashion shows in Milan where people are essentially wearing like garbage bags and weird other things. I think I saw a runway the other day where somebody was wearing another human being as their clothing, it's pretty unbelievable how ridiculous the fashion is in some of these fashion shows. Like, it's stuff that no one would ever wear in real life, except maybe Lady Gaga. The reason that I like this new fashion, this weird runway fashion, and you don't, is because you don't understand it. I understand it because I'm more sophisticated than you are. I'm rich. I'm important. I understand why this is good. You don't. That's what distinguishes us, right? That's the idea. Modern art is the same way, right? When stuff like Cubism came out and so on and so forth, all these kinds of art styles were grotesque to normal people. But these very rich people who wanted to distinguish themselves from the masses were like, no, I understand it. You just don't understand it, right? And you still have people like that. I mean, I can't tell you how many art classes I've taken in my life, art history classes in particular, and these art history teachers just go on about this is what this means and you've got to understand it to really be able to interpret it properly and blah, 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 blah. And it really is this like, I'm part of this special club and other people aren't because they're just not smart enough. It's just an ego thing. People are trying to pretend that they're better than other people. That's all it is. Avant-garde films is another example, right? If you like a crappy, slow, garbage film, right, then you distinguish yourself from other people who just don't get it, right? This is why you've got so many boring crap films winning Oscars, winning Academy Awards. Like, of course they're going to win the Academy Award. It's garbage, and it's about, a gay cowboy or something. But the problem here is that we're talking about beliefs like socialism, which actually affect a lot of people in the country. So if you have this leftist who wants to distinguish himself or herself by expressing a belief that they understand and you just don't understand because you're a peasant, in the world of art or something like that, it just makes you look like a arrogant SOB. But in the world of politics, it could actually have dramatic ramifications, very dangerous ramifications for our country. And that's where we are now with this, socialist trend and all these like far left trends, open borders and stuff like that. The only good thing I can see about it is that I think it is a trend, right? So it's something where you always had to find the next cool thing for these rich people who want to distinguish themselves from the peasants to adhere to in order to try to display their distinction from the peasants, right? They are going to move on to other things eventually. Socialism will no longer be trendy. All of these leftist views will no longer be trendy. I mean, they'll still probably be there, but they're not going to be the thing, right? And once we've gotten past that, hopefully it'll just go away. I don't know when that's going to be. Hopefully soon. All right, let's keep reading here. We feel pressure to display our status in new ways, as I said. This is why fashionable clothing always changes. All right, I read this bit, but let's read it again. But as trendy clothes and other products become more accessible and affordable, there is increasingly less status attached to luxury goods. The upper classes have found a clever solution to this problem. Luxury beliefs. There are ideas and opinions that confer status on the rich at very little cost, while taking a toll on the lower class. One example of luxury belief is that all family structures are equal. This is not true. Evidence is clear that families with two married parents are the most beneficial for young children, and yet, affluent, educated people raised by two married parents is more likely than others to believe monogamy is outdated, marriage is a sham, or that all families are the same. So if you're rich and your parents stayed together and you had a good childhood, you're more likely to believe that marriage is a sham and, not all families are the same, And I think this goes to show that a lot of times the things that were given instead of the things that were earned are things that we tend not to value, right? If you're handed something, if you're given something, you tend not to value it as much as if you've earned it, right? And I think, having a good life, having a good childhood is something oftentimes people take for granted because they didn't earn that, they were just given it. Relaxed attitudes about marriage trickled down to the working class and the poor. In the 1960s, marriage rates between upper class and lower class Americans were nearly identical, but during this time, affluent Americans loosened social norms, expressing skepticism about marriage and monogamy. This luxury belief contributed to the erosion of the family. Today, the marriage rates of affluent Americans are nearly the same as they were in the 1960s, but working class people are far less likely to get married. Furthermore, out-of-wedlock birth rates are more than 10 times higher than they were in 1960, mostly among poor and working class. Affluent people seldom have kids out of wedlock, but are more likely than others to express the luxury belief that doing so is of no consequence. Another luxury belief is that religion is irrational and harmful. Members of the upper class are most likely to be atheist or non-religious, but they have the resources and access to thrive without the unifying social edifice of religion. I don't think that's the only reason. I don't think it's just that they have the resources and access to thrive without religion, or, without the unifying social edifice, as he calls it. I don't think that's actually why. I think the reason is because when you have a ton of money, you have a lot of options to do basically whatever you want in the world. And if you have the option to do whatever you want in the world, you don't want to be restricted by anything. Any laws, any codes of ethics, anything like that. I find that a lot of very wealthy people, they don't want to be constrained by ethics. So in California anyway, a lot of people who are religious aren't really religious. They're spiritual, right? They call themselves spiritual. And a lot of times they're some kind of like quasi-Buddhist. And they engage in things like sound baths and, these other kind of meditation groups. That's their church, essentially. And they're almost always on drugs. They all smoke weed and they're all on mushrooms all the time and everything. That's their thing. Their thing is doing drugs and trying to trip out and trying to have these hallucinogenic experiences. And they think that that's the same as being religious, but they actually think it's better than being religious because they are not confined by any kind of strict code of ethics. And they don't want that because, if you have a strict code of ethics and you break it, you feel guilty. And, I don't want to feel bad. Why do you make me feel bad, dude? And another thing about it, the rejection of traditional religion, primarily Christianity, right? Is that if Christianity is correct, and if you accept Christianity as true, then you also have to accept that there is an authority above you. And I think that rich people and very, very high IQ people hate that concept, hate the idea that there is some ultimate authority that they must respect, that they have to adhere to the rules of this higher authority, this higher power. They want to be able to do whatever they want, whenever they want no consequences, they don't want to feel guilt, and they want to be the ultimate God of their own lives. They are their own God. It is an incredibly narcissistic thing to do, to reject religion and to say, I know better than all of my ancestors. I know better than 90% of the world that's ever existed that believes in a higher power, that believes in a God. I know better than all of them. I am my own God. I will choose my own destiny. I do not need to be confined to any kind of code of ethics. A lot of atheists will say, no, I have a code of ethics. But it's like, yeah, you have a code of ethics, but it's not really a code. It's just sort of a guideline. And if that code of ethics comes up against what you think is of any kind of benefit to your own life, you're going to dismiss that code of ethics instantly. And the same is true of some people who practice traditional religion as well, but those are what we have traditionally called bad people. All right, let's continue. Places of worship are essential for the social fabric of poor communities. Denigrating the importance of religion harms the poor. I don't really necessarily think that. I think that may have been true historically, but I don't think it's necessarily true today. While affluent people often find meaning in their work, most Americans do not have the luxury of a profession. They have jobs. They clock in, they clock out. Without a family or community to care for, such a job can feel meaningless. And I think that's very true. Oftentimes we find purpose in our careers, but I think it's very dangerous to say that this is the best way to find purpose in life. And this really has been the primary problem with feminism, I think. If you look at all of the great feminist figures of history, they're all these very, very wealthy women who I imagine were just basically bored. And they were just like, I'm going to be the champion of women. I'm going to make sure that all these poor women, they have a voice. I'm going to stand up for them, right? They needed a purpose, and that was their purpose, right? And this idea came about that women are going to get more fulfillment in life if they have a career than if they have a husband and they have children and they raise a family. I think that is, for 99% of women, I think that's false, right? I think a lot of women traditionally who could not get married and could not have children because they were, for whatever reason, undesirable. Yeah, certainly a profession would have been more fulfilling than having a family because they couldn't have a family. They didn't have that option. But for most women who are desirable enough to get married, are desirable enough to have children, their husband is going to love them and care about them and so on and so forth, they're going to be far more fulfilled by getting married and raising a family. And Jordan Peterson has talked about this a lot in interviews where, because he's a clinical psychologist, and he's said that he's spoken to many women who have come to him too old to have children and said, what do? I missed my opportunity to have children because I was so focused on my career. And he's like, yeah, what can they do? They're basically screwed. They've destroyed their lives because society told them they're going to be fulfilled by a career, and they weren't.
You see lots of women who at 40 haven't had kids and perhaps wanted to, and that's not a pleasant situation. I was talking to a woman who is about 39, a professional woman, attractive, well put together, competent, well educated, successful in her profession, unmarried, and desperate to have a child. She said no one ever talked to her about the fact that she'd actually want to have a family or encouraged her to think about doing that. And it was like she woke up in her late 30s and thought, this profession of mine is actually nowhere near as comprehensively fulfilling as the advertisements claimed, which is something that virtually everyone discovers as they move forward in their professional career. The reason that you get paid generally is because you're doing something that you wouldn't choose to do if you weren't being paid for it. And so the idea that your career is going to be the fundamental source of your fulfillment is true for a very tiny minority of people. And even with them, it's complicated. So she was tearful and upset about the fact that it took her so long to discover that there were other important dimensions to life, and that motherhood turns out to be, well, how many things do you do in your life? You have a career, you have your friends, you have your family, you have your relationship. That's it. There's 4 things. Now, you can expand that to some degree. You can have, maybe you're creative and you make good use of your personal time. There's other factors that aren't trivial, but those 4 things are canonically important. You miss one of them, and you're going to pay for it. And so our society needs to rethink our relative valuation of career versus motherhood. The idea that most 19-year-old women are fed, which is that their career will be the primary purpose of their life, is actually a lie.
Then there is the luxury belief that individual decisions don't matter much compared to random social forces, including luck. This belief is more common among many of my peers at Yale and Cambridge than kids I grew up with in foster care or the women and men I served with in the military. The key message is that the outcomes of your life are beyond your control. This idea works to the benefit of the upper class, but it harms ordinary people. I'm not sure I agree with him on this one, because I think, just objectively speaking, luck probably does influence your life more than hard work or anything else, because, certainly if you're born in the slums of India, or you're born to an affluent family on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, your life is going to turn out a lot differently, right? And those changes are going to be so dramatic that it doesn't matter how hard you work when you're in the slums of India, you're probably never going to reach the same kind of pinnacle of success as somebody who was born in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. So I don't know what he's getting at here, why he thinks that this is wrong. I think this is just true, and it's just part of life. I think that he could probably get into the idea of hierarchies a little bit more here and how they're natural and normal, and that we shouldn't try to fight against them so much in society. Maybe some we should, but most we probably shouldn't. But anyway, I disagree with him a little bit on that. I do think luck has a lot to do with your life, and that's just life, though. My father always told me, life is unfair, and you should just have to deal with it. Not only should you have to deal with it, but it's probably a good thing that life isn't fair, because being born in America in itself makes you one of the luckiest people in the world. It is common to see students at prestigious universities work ceaselessly and then downplay the importance of their tenacity. They perform an aw shucks routine to suggest that they just got lucky rather than accept credit for their efforts. The message is damning. If disadvantaged people believe random chance is the key factor for success, they will be less likely to strive. Again, I'm not sure I agree with this, because I don't typically meet a lot of rich, lucky people who downplay their own efforts. I mean, most of them are just like, oh gosh, I work so much, it's unbelievable. They do value their own hard work, and they think maybe that people don't appreciate them as much as they should. But there is something to be said for people who are given everything in life, and they just think that everything that anybody ever does, or the reason anybody ever succeeds, is just luck, right? I mean, this definitely happens with rich people who are essentially handed entrance into, say, Princeton or something like that, and then they're handed an excellent job at the best consulting firms in the world or whatever it is. Of course those people are going to think basically all life is luck. And I see this with actors as well, super successful actors. They'll certainly take their own efforts seriously. They'll be like, I'm a serious actor, I study my craft, And it's like, come on, man, you're just playing make-believe and you're pretty good at it. That's basically it. But they take it very seriously for what they do. But then I think deep down they do feel like a bit of a fraud, they have millions and millions of dollars. They make so much money acting. I think they think, do I really deserve this? Do I really deserve all this money for playing make-believe? And I think deep down they know that they don't. And so they sit there and they think, okay, there's tons of good actors in Hollywood. Any one of them could have gotten this part, and I might not have gotten it and then become this huge success. So I was very, very lucky. And they boil all their success down to luck, and they boil everybody else's success down to luck. And it just isn't true. It just isn't right. And so, you have that balance of some people's success in life is due to hard work. Some people's success in life is due to their choices that they make. And some people's failures are due to the choices that they make. But then you've got other people who are really, really lucky, and some people who are really, really unlucky. No matter how hard they work, no matter how much they try, no matter how good they are at something, they will still fail. And so I do think hard work, I do think effort goes into a lot of it. I do think the choices we make goes into a lot of it, but I also think luck goes into it a lot. So I'm kind of in the middle there. I'm not entirely on the side of those who think luck is everything. I'm not entirely on the side of this guy who thinks luck has nothing to do with it. I do think we're somewhere in the middle there in reality. Okay, let's keep reading. White privilege is the luxury belief that took me the longest to understand because I grew up around poor whites. Often members of the upper class claim that racial disparities stem from inherent advantages held by whites, yet Asian Americans are more educated, have higher earnings, and live longer than whites. Affluent whites are the most enthusiastic about the idea of white privilege. Yet they are the least likely to incur any cost for promoting that belief. Rather, they raise their social standing by talking about their privilege. I love this paragraph. This is by far the best paragraph in this entire article, and it perfectly sums up the problem here, right? You've got these rich white people who are taking the wealth privilege that they have, and they're really ignoring that, and they're pretending that the privilege they have comes from their being white. Now, there are rich Asians, there are rich black people, there are rich people of every color, every religion, everything, but they're pretending that no, it's being white that gives me my privilege. And when you do that, you dilute your privilege because most Americans are white. Something like 60% of Americans are white. So now you're saying, well, the privilege that I have is actually the same privilege that's shared by all these poor people because they're also white. We're all privileged because we're white. No. You're privileged because you're rich, right? But you're sort of shifting your advantage over to this thing that lots of people have. So you're saying like, well, don't hate me because I'm rich. Hate me because I'm white. Hate all of us because we're white, right? And then they're no longer the targets of ire because they're no longer super advantaged because they're rich. They're mildly advantaged because they're white, just like all these other people. And this is despicable, really, because what ends up happening is you're never going to stop having your wealth advantage unless you lose all your money. You're never going to stop being rich. You're never going to have that privilege taken away from you. But what you are doing is you're actually creating a scenario in which white people have less privilege than everybody else, right? Because let's say this poor white guy is trying to get a job. Let's say he is the best candidate for that job in the world. But the guy doing the hiring believes in equity. He's some kind of socialist or something. And he decides, no, we cannot hire white people. We can only hire black people. We can only hire Hispanics. We can only hire Muslims, whatever. In fact, they're doing this in certain schools. They have to lay people off, but they're going to lay off the white people first, which is totally illegal. And it's totally immoral, but it's this concept of equity that people have in their mind, right? And these aren't super rich people laying off these white folks, right? And these aren't super rich white folks that are getting laid off. This is an idea that got into their heads that is popularized by these rich white a-holes, right? And other kinds of activists, socialists, and other lunatics that are now hurting these middle-class white folks. And so we have created a disadvantage for white people through this idea. And a lot of the people promoting these ideas are these rich white people who believe these luxury beliefs. Luxury because the consequences of them don't affect them. They only affect other white people. So F you rich white people who believe that white privilege exists and you push that concept on the rest of us. F you. All right, moving on. In other words, upper whites gain status by talking about their high status. When laws are enacted to combat white privilege, it won't be the privileged whites who are harmed. Poor whites will bear the brunt. Exactly. It's possible that affluent whites don't always agree with their own luxury beliefs, or at least have doubts. Maybe they don't like the ideological fur coat they're wearing, but if their peers punish them for not sporting it all over town, they will never leave the house without it again. This is very true in Los Angeles. In Hollywood, I cannot tell you how many moderate or even right-wing actors, producers, directors that I have met that have to pretend that they're these radical leftists just in order to work in the film industry without getting blacklisted. Just 2 days ago, I had this long conversation with a very successful producer director in Hollywood over the phone just the other day, And we talked about all of this, how basically everyone we know has to pretend, that they either don't talk about politics at all, or they legitimately pretend that they're radical leftists in order to continue to work in Hollywood. And it's a sick situation, right? I mean, it really is. People complain like, oh, you can't compare yourself to the Jews in Nazi Germany. It really is like the Jews in Nazi Germany. There are Jews in Nazi Germany who pretended to be Christian Germans in order to not be killed, right? And some people might say, oh, that's not a noble way of living. That's, you have to have your integrity in your beliefs, and you have to stand up and say what you believe. I don't know, man. I have sympathy for that. I'm not like that myself. Obviously, I stand up for what I believe and I say what I think. But, when I worked in Hollywood, it is terrifying, right? I did not talk about politics very much when I was on set because you do risk getting kicked off set. And I have been kicked off a set before for saying things that people didn't like. I told a girl, this is actually a pretty funny story. I told a girl on a set once who told me that she was a lesbian. I said, you know what? I think one day you're going to meet the man of your dreams. You're going to get married. And this girl was super mad at me, and she starts screaming and yelling at me, literally screaming at me, screaming at the top of her lungs. People around us were looking at us like, what the hell did that guy do, right? And one of the lawyers for the TV show came up to me, pulled me aside and said, we have to fire you from this show. You're not allowed to work on this show anymore. I'm like, okay, all right. And so I had to leave the show. I wasn't allowed to be on the show. And so I don't know how many years ago that was. That was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago or something. And just the other day, I'm scrolling through Instagram, and I came upon a girl's Instagram that I knew from that show. And she's friends with this girl that screamed at me and everything, that I told her she'd probably get married. And so I saw some photos of a wedding. And this is the girl that I told, I think you're going to one day meet the man of your dreams and you're going to marry him, right? Even though she said she was a lesbian. And she starts screaming at me, right? It's this girl, and she's getting married to a guy. I was right. And so I wrote this girl. I was like, hey, my prediction came true. I got kicked off that show for nothing. It's like so ironic. Like the irony to me is hilarious. This girl did not find it funny. She was just like, why would you say that? She's bisexual. She just found a guy that she liked, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, that's not what she said to me. She said she was a lesbian. And when I told her she was going to meet and marry a man one day, she freaked out, got me kicked off the show. And this girl didn't have much to say in response to that, but I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, that's pretty amazing, actually, that I was able to just look at that girl and be like, you're not a lesbian. You're just confused, I knew it. And it wasn't like she was pretty. I don't know how I knew that. I just knew. All right, let's keep going here. Because like with diamond rings or designer clothes of old, upper class people don a luxury belief to separate themselves from the lower class. These beliefs in turn produce real tangible consequences for disadvantaged people, further widening the divide. Just as fashionable clothing will soon be outdated, so will today's fashionable beliefs. In the future, expect the upper class to defame even more values, including ones that they hold dear, in their quest to gain top dog status. Again, that was written by Rob Henderson, PhD at the University of Cambridge, and potentially an actual genius. All right, well, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. That's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant, it's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.